Welcome back to the BikeSafe Bike Shop. Do the brakes on your bike drag or do they feel really lousy? Today we're going to look over a whole bunch of DIY things you can do to improve the performance of your brakes. Now of course, we are going to be adjusting the one safety line you have on your bike to get it stopped. So if you don't feel comfortable doing anything here, or if you come across something that we didn't mention in the video, go to your local bike shop, they'll help you figure it out. Without further ado, let's talk brakes. All bicycle brakes work on the principle of clamping or pressing a stationary surface against a rotating surface on the wheels. This creates friction, which slows or stops the bike. All bicycle brakes, with exception to hydraulic ones, use an inner cable pulling against an outer housing to transfer the mechanical effort at your hand to the brake caliper or arm. There are many types of brakes out there, more than we can cover here, but we're going to go over the adjustment of the most common ones: side pulls and dual pivots, V-brakes, and disc brakes. And since that's a lot to cover, we're only going to go over how to fix brakes that barely apply, how to fix brakes that drag, and how to replace brake pads. Keep in mind, if your brake housing is visibly damaged, split, or rusty enough that the cable binds, stop right now. Cables like these must be replaced before you perform any adjustment. Also, regardless of the type of brake you have, check to make sure that the brake lever adjuster barrel isn't unscrewed so much that it is barely installed. This is only used for minor adjustments, so if it's like this, spin the lock nut all the way forward and then thread the adjuster barrel back into the brake lever all the way. Also do this at the caliper if applicable. By now, your brakes might not even apply at all, but don't worry. Let's learn how to fix brakes that barely apply. If your brake pads hover and barely stop the wheel at this point, here's what to do. On side pulls and dual pivots, undo the pinch bolt holding the cable in place. This releases the caliper. Then grab the brake arms, pull the inner cable taut, and tighten the pinch bolt with less slack. Make sure the brake cable housing is seated properly and not falling out of the lever or cable stops when you do this. You can do the same thing on V-brakes by undoing the pinch bolt on the arm and pulling the cable together. Be very careful with front V-brakes, as too tight an adjustment will throw you over the bars. If you need to fine-tune, you can unscrew the adjuster barrel counterclockwise to bring the pads closer to the rim. Lock this adjustment down with a locking nut when you're done. Disc brakes sit so close to the rotor that it's unlikely they barely apply, unless the cable is too slack. If you can't fix this with a couple of turns of the adjuster barrel, undo the pinch bolt and adjust the cable from that point. And now, let's fix dragging brakes. Side pulls and dual pivots sometimes don't sit centered, causing a pad to drag. To correct this, you'll need a narrow wrench, like this one, to rotate the brake back into alignment. Dual pivots also have a centering adjustment, which can be fine-tuned with a screwdriver or Allen key, depending on the model. This should do it unless the brake rotates way too easily. If so, the brake may be loose in the frame. Check the back for a 5mm recessed Allen bolt or 10mm nut and tighten it until the brake is snug. Then realign the caliper. Make sure the caliper arms still move freely after tightening this nut. If the brake arms tighten up after tightening the caliper to the frame or flop around excessively, the two nuts in the front of the brake, the ones that hold the arms of the brake in place, may be improperly adjusted. To fix this, use a narrow wrench on the inner nut and a conventional wrench to undo the outer cap nut. Then rotate the inner nut counterclockwise if loosening the arms or clockwise if tightening. Adjust until the caliper arms unstick or don't bend, respectively. Once you've perfected the adjustment, hold the inner nut and tighten the outer cap nut. Keep in mind that there's some really low-end side pulls that will always bend forward no matter how careful you are adjusting them. V-brakes are adjusted with these screws on either side of the arms. Turning counterclockwise loosens spring tension and allows the pad to get closer to the rim, while clockwise does the opposite. Keep adjusting both sides a half turn at a time until the brake pads are at equal distances from the rim and don't rub. While doing this, apply and release the brakes to help them seat. Like side pulls, there are low-quality V-brakes as well that can make this adjustment a chore. These V-brakes have plastic retainers to hold their adjuster screws, and these retainers crack, fall off, and it just makes it impossible to put any tension on the return spring. If disc brakes drag, chances are the rotor is bent, though the caliper could be improperly centered. To recenter a caliper, first lightly loosen the 2 bolts that hold it to the frame. If there's a round pad adjuster on the outboard side of the caliper, turn this adjuster out, then back in 1 revolution. Then spin the inner adjuster clockwise until the caliper is locked onto the rotor. Now you can tighten the caliper down again and loosen both pad adjusters a 1/4 or 1/2 turn. If you only have an inner pad adjuster, turn it all the way in, then back it off a 1/4 turn. Now apply the brakes and hold them. This will pull the caliper into alignment. Tighten the caliper down, release the brakes, and rotate the inner pad a 1/4 of a turn counterclockwise. This should give you proper operating discs. Which brings us to, finally, brake pad replacement. If your brake pads are hard as a rock or worn, your brakes won't work well no matter how well you adjust them. Older side pull brake pads are really simple to swap, using only a 10mm nut or Allen key and a washer. These are as simple as taking the old one out, installing the new pad, aligning it to the rim, and you're done. By comparison, modern brake pads are a lot more complex. They have a concave washer and a thin convex washer that sit on the inside. And on the outside, there's another convex washer, another concave washer, a flat washer, and an Allen key nut, in this order. The concave washers are usually 2 different thicknesses to allow the pad to be brought inboard or outboard. You can swap them as necessary. You might want to undo your brakes quick release to make installing these easier. Once you have the old pads off, you can install this menagerie. And once the pad is on, apply the brakes or press the brake arm inward so you can align the pad and then tighten them up. If they squeal in use after this adjustment, slide a business card through the back while adjusting them to the rim. This tows the pad inwards and reduces the chances of squealing. On disc brakes, first drop the wheel. There are different types of pad installations for these. Some have a cotter pin holding the pads in place, easy enough to undo, while others are clipped in place and must be pulled out carefully with pliers along with the spring between each pad. To reinstall these, sandwich the pads between the spring, feed them in the correct orientation into the caliper, and then tap them lightly into place. Now those are the most common brakes that you'll find that you'll have to do DIY work on. But if you find any others, don't hesitate to do a Google search. Roller brakes, center pulls, all those type of brakes are pretty well documented online. So until next time, we'll see you later, right here at the BikeSafe Bike Shop.